I'm sure there are translation issues involved in just how coarse this Bonhoeffer letter from prison seems to be, and yet his passion is understandable to all of us, isn't it? As fascism rose in Germany, which at the time had the highest average education in the world, Germany was the most technologically advanced country in the world. And yet it allowed fascism to creep into their politics until it drove Germany to become history's most heinous regime, leaving even the likes of Caligula and Genghis Khan in the dust. And it's not that it was difficult to see what was happening. It may have evolved over time, and yet information was clearly available. A woman I knew, who was a member of my first church 40 years ago, was a teenager in Germany during the rise of Hitler. And she said, I never thought about where the Jews were being taken. I never thought about the countries that we were invading. What I saw were young German men in uniform marching proudly in the streets, and it made me proud to be a German. So when Bonhoeffer rages against stupidity, what he is saying is basically what the famous psychiatrist M. Scott Peck said in his definition of human evil. Evil, Peck says, is willful ignorance. It's not a crime to not be smart. It doesn't make you a bad person if you lack the necessary skills to gain higher education. What is bad is to know better and then to refuse to acknowledge facts, to willfully hold on to ignorance, especially in a time of great moral crisis. Certainly, Bonhoeffer was alive at one of those times, and folks, we are too. What Bonhoeffer calls stupidity might also be thought of as complacency, or a kind of self-serving acquiescence, like white people not being concerned about white privilege. You know that there's a lot of ethical violations that surround it, and yet if you are a beneficiary of it, you can be acquiescent about it because it serves your greater purposes. I would ask you to look at the hypocrisy on display in the news this week. We engaged in a very risky military action in Syria that runs the risk of accidentally killing Russian soldiers or blowing up Russian aircraft that could literally light a fuse of a new world war. And we did it ostensibly because of moral outrage about Assad's use of chemical weapons on what our president called those beautiful babies. When folks, just a year ago, Trump refused to let any of those beautiful babies from Syria to come into our country because those beautiful babies might secretly be terrorists. Amen. Now let me cast this event in a somewhat more sobering light of economics. On Friday night, we launched 112 Tomahawk missiles into Syria. And the numbers around this there would be people that would debate it, but a Tomahawk missile, some people would say would cost $1.2 million, but given servicing and personnel and transportation, a Tomahawk missile, by the time it is fired, cost almost $2 million, $1.87 million, which, without even considering other costs related to it, means that on Friday night, we launched $224 million worth of ordnance into Syria because they had used chemical weapons. But now you compare that to the cost of what it would take to remove lead pipes from Flint, Michigan, which would be about $55 million. We have been using chemical warfare on a generation of children in Flint, Michigan, that we could repair for 1/5 of the cost of what we spent on Tomahawk missiles on Friday night. Now, how is it that we could spend 5 times as much in one night responding to what is clearly a tragedy, a war crime in Syria, but spend years doing nothing about the poisoning of children in Flint, Michigan? Well, now, there are 2 issues around this. The first is that the primary cost in Flint would be labor. And there's not a lot of profit for corporations to make out of labor. Labor is a cost, but you know, pipes don't cost that much. So most of what it takes to fix Flint would go to working class people. But when you fire off a bunch of Tomahawk missiles, most of the cost is profit to the corporations that make it, primarily Raytheon. So most of that $280 million, maybe $200 million of it, becomes a corporate profit. Now, I hate to be this cynical, and if I'm wrong, I beg you to find an opportunity to pull together the evidence to show me where I'm wrong. But I'm afraid our government is willing to spend unlimited amounts of money to create corporate profit and not willing to spend very much at all to ease human suffering. Now, secondly, there is an inescapable wag the dog factor when our president is under so much political and legal trouble that a military action can relieve him, at least momentarily, from some embarrassing press. Besides, I mean, really, think about it. The problem here is that the Syrian government, not just in chemical weapons, but the Syrian government with conventional weapons, is bombing its own people. So how can we get them to stop other than to bomb their own people for them? I mean, really, when you think about it, who dies in these bombs? It's not Assad. It's not the leadership. We go about killing the same people that Assad's been killing to show Assad to stop killing them. If that makes sense to you, you are part of the problem here. So I get Bonhoeffer's almost defeated sense that you simply cannot argue with stupidity. Stupid doesn't respond to information. Stupid doesn't respond to facts or rational argument. And for me as a pastor, what is more maddening is that stupid appears to be impervious to an appeal to basic human compassion. And here's the challenge that I believe faces our time so much more than actually faced Bonhoeffer in the 1940s. We've come to a time when there is a public insistence that all views be held to be of equal value. Now, when I was a kid, we were led to believe that doctors, for example, possessed almost magical insight and wisdom. We often mistook their absolutely horrible handwriting for Latin, as if Latin itself somehow contained the incantational power. You know, Harry Potter, whenever he raises his wand, incantations are always in Latin, as if magic lives in that language. So in our age, we've come to recognize that medical knowledge is as full of holes as Swiss cheese, and some doctors are smarter than others, and that Dr. House is just a fictional character who doesn't work in any hospital. But we have also simultaneously arrived at a time where the educated opinion of a trained physician is laid side by side with the opinion of, forgive me for describing it this way, a heavily pierced and tattooed massage therapist, and people act like they choose between the advice of one or the other with complete rational abandon, just like you would pick a chocolate out of a Whitman sampler. There is a difference between an educated and informed opinion and a completely uninformed opinion. Now, I know that you don't come here for medical advice, and that's a good decision on your part. But I'm going to tell you something right now that you should pay attention to. There is a new vaccine for shingles that is nearly twice as effective as the old vaccine, and you can get it even if you had the old vaccine, even if you got it 3 or 4 months ago. So thank you, Dr. Crockett, for passing that information along to me. But if you've ever known anyone that's had shingles, you know you don't want shingles. And your insurance will probably pay 100% of the cost. So I've gotten the first round of the inoculation, and I'll get the rest of it in a couple of months. And so should you. Everybody should go get the new shingles vaccine. Now, in a conversation with friends about this vaccine, a friend of mine who's deeply invested in astrology and tarot cards and all the magical stuff they sell in tattoo parlors looked at me and said, "I don't believe in vaccines." I don't believe in vaccines, as if there was no information available by which to make a decision like that, as if there was no research, no facts to consider, just, "I don't believe in vaccines." That's the trap of willful ignorance. And if I may make a huge leap of logic, that's how Donald Trump got elected President of the United States. When an uninformed opinion demands equal footing with an informed opinion, then education, science, diplomacy, government, and philosophy become virtually useless. More than 20 years ago, in a very prophetic way, Carl Sagan wrote, "I have a foreboding of an America in my children's or grandchildren's time when the people have lost the ability to set their own agendas or knowledgeably question those in authority, when clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our horoscopes, our critical faculties in decline, unable to distinguish between what feels good and what's true, we slide almost without noticing back into superstition and darkness." Sagan continues, "The dumbing down of America is most evident in the slow decay of substantive content in the enormously influential media. The 30-second soundbite, now down to 10 seconds or less, lowest common denominator programming, credulous presentations on pseudoscience and superstition, but especially a kind of celebration of ignorance." Now, I want to give you a current example. We don't hear much out of our Missouri Congressman Billy Long. Stop groaning. I'm talking. Billy Long is almost a cardboard cutout put in place to vote the way that his Tea Party funders tell him to vote. There's not a lot of reflection going on there. But I was very sorry to hear his high-pitched voice on TV during the questioning of Mark Zuckerberg about the security failings on Facebook. Now, there are not a lot of members of Congress who are either sufficiently tech-savvy or sufficiently intelligent to really be able to hold Zuckerberg's feet to the flames, but Billy Long was just completely out of his league. But Long was only one of several congressmen who brought up the internet darlings, Diamond and Silk. He's holding up a picture of them behind him. I'd never heard of them before, but they're two African-American sisters who are Trump supporters, if that doesn't make your head freeze up. But they, looking at the content of what they put on the internet, could almost make Charles Darwin wonder if evolution had ever happened. And yet Billy Long was disturbed by the fact that Facebook had blocked a lot of Diamond and Silk's content because it was deemed to be dangerous. And Long was saying, just because it's conservative, you say it's dangerous. But the truth is, it's dangerously stupid. The only thing that dampened the humiliation of having our congressman look so ignorant on TV was the fact that C-SPAN insisted on identifying him as a Republican Congress member from Illinois. Yeah. Illinois has never done anything to me, but I believe I can confidently say that they can have him. Because if there is a member of Congress who is, to use Bonhoeffer's term, more stupid than Billy Long, then don't tell me who it is. I don't want to know who that could be. Now, again, it's not a crime to have a deficit of intelligence. So I don't want to just throw shade on Billy Long. He was elected. And so if our Congress member is historically stupid, then that's not really on him, is it? I know that it's rude to call anyone stupid, and anyone who is a decent parent tries to tell their children not to ever call anyone such a derogatory name, even when they are, even when it is manifestly obvious, such as in the case of Billy Long. But the lack of security on Facebook may be one of the single factors, that factor alone, that made the difference in swaying the 2016 election so that the most dangerous head of state in the 21st century won an election. So suffice it to say, Zuckerberg has a lot of splaining to do that has nothing to do with Diamond and Silk, and in fact really needed to have been questioned in a way. You're getting ahead of me there, Ashley. A little too much coffee back there, baby. Now, several years ago, this was one of the snarky T-shirts that you could find at the mall declaring "I'm was stupid," which is so rude that I sincerely doubt that they sold very many of the shirts. It'd be a great way to lose friends. Although I thought when the DNC in the 2016 election made "I'm with her" their campaign slogan, that the Republicans could have revived this shirt to announce that they are, in fact, with stupid. Because absolutely, for most of the 2016 campaign, their candidate, who watches a lot of TV and virtually does not or possibly cannot read, was clearly the most uneducated and least qualified candidate for the office of presidency in the history of our country. Now, a couple of years ago, there was an updated version of this novelty shirt that I actually did like, to say, "I'm not with stupid anymore." That's a hopeful thing to say. There are a whole lot of people who have spent way too much of their lives in the wrong relationship, and it's wonderful for them to be able to declare of themselves that they are entirely free of that self-deprecating relationship. Now, if only we could get voters to break up with stupid, then we would all have something to hope for. Now, I apologize for sounding so snarky myself this morning, but it just seems like we've come to a gloves-off time in history. And I know that every evening when I'm on tour in England, the first 2 weeks of May when I'm there, that every night when all the lectures and Q&A and everything else is over, I'm going to be found sitting around a table with some people drinking a room temperature beer. I don't know what that's about. And they're going to ask me to explain American politics to them. And there is no way to describe what has happened to America in a way that keeps America from losing face. Now, as a testament to the dire nature of our present moment, the former Secretary of State, remember when we had a Secretary of State? Madeline Albright has just released this book. And I'm not always a fan of Albright's because she's more than a little bit too hawkish for my taste. But having grown up in Czechoslovakia during the war years, when she talks about fascism, she is speaking with a level of authority that we should pay attention to. Now, I have enough misgivings about Madeline Albright that I didn't buy the book, but I spent more than it would have cost to buy the book in coffee at Barnes & Noble's coffee shop reading the book. But I took illegal photographs of pages to have this quote. She writes in the first chapter, "If we think of fascism as a wound from the past that has almost healed, putting Trump in the White House was like ripping the bandage and picking at the scab." Now, that's a serious thing to say for someone that knows about fascism. Near the end of the book, Albright concludes, "Donald Trump has spoken harshly about the institutions and principles that make up the foundation of open government. In the process, he has systematically degraded political discourse in the United States, shown an astonishing disregard for facts, libeled his predecessors, threatened to lock up political rivals, referred to mainstream journalists as the enemy of the American people, spread falsehoods about the integrity of the U.S. electoral process, touted mindlessly nationalistic economic and trade policies, vilified immigrants and the countries from which they come, and nurtured a paranoid bigotry toward the followers of one of the world's foremost religions. Now, she goes on, but I trust from that you've got the flavor of the book. Now, the allure of fascism historically is an attraction to powerful leadership, even if that powerful leadership comes from a dictator. It is an attraction to nationalism, even if that means an irrational attack on other races, other religions, other nations, and a wholesale demonizing of a free press or any form of opposition, whether it comes from another political party or even from the church. What I find to be very odd in our current climate is that fascism usually appeals to people in a time of great national crisis. But when Trump began spewing fascist ideology, we were in a long, sustained economic recovery. We were making real progress in overcoming racism. Limits to access to health care were falling away, and we had managed to go 15 years without a major terrorist attack. So what drove voters to accept a fascist campaign message? And here's the deeper irony for me. For most of 2016, Trump was almost a comedic character who couldn't possibly win. No one could take him seriously. But Russian hackers and bots were assigned to spread pro-Trump and anti-Clinton propaganda on social media to sway the election. Now, going into that November election, Obama, Clinton, Comey, heck, even Donald Trump didn't believe that the American people were dumb enough or racist enough or homophobic enough or xenophobic or misogynist enough to elect Donald Trump. But Obama, Clinton, and Comey overestimated the voting public, and Putin got it right. That's a painful fact. Amen. Folks, Russia did not hack into our voting machines. They didn't hack into our news stations to plant false stories in our media dialogue. They simply sent racist, Islamophobic, misogynistic, homophobic, and xenophobic messages to Americans who were already predisposed to believe that crap, and who enthusiastically accepted even crazier and crazier stories from Russian bots. They didn't hack our computers. They appealed to our racism, our fear, and it worked. So yeah, be mad at Russia for messing with our election. But seriously, guys, isn't this on us? Isn't this really on us? And I expect that some of our listeners, and probably some of you here in the room today, are not too happy with me being so unfiltered about what I'm saying today. And I'm sorry, not sorry, for possibly offending your sensibilities. But I beg you to consider that if the clergy hadn't been so damn tepid for the last 20 years, our population might not be so vulnerable to such an easy below-the-belt punch from some thug like Vladimir Putin. Bonhoeffer's peers thought that he had gone too far, and admittedly, a pastor planning a murder, that's not something I normally do. But you could say that Bonhoeffer didn't get to it soon enough, that he and his peers went along for too long. The same could be said in every moment of real crisis, from Churchill to Gandhi to King. So let's not be that passive generation that tells everyone to be patient and to wait, because sometimes I would love to see an end to the partisan divide in our country, but that end can't come through surrender. Peace in the presence of injustice is not a laudable virtue. It's just surrender. We can't surrender. Now, I know you get tired of having to think about these things. Honestly, I'm tired of talking about them. I have much more important things to think about, to write about, and to talk about than Donald Trump. But we cannot be guilty of acquiescence just because we are embarrassed and bored by our Clementine Caligula. Even though the corporate media has started to parrot the fascist lingo, calling hard news and real facts fake news, and trying to lull us to sleep as our democracy is taken from us, we must not be gullible. We must not be complacent, and we sure must not be compliant, because to do so is dangerous to democracy.
Amen.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about trouble and trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.